What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today is going to be the second and final rebuttal to Spartan Theology in our ongoing debate. His rebuttal is linked below, so I highly suggest you go and watch that before continuing on. So if you're interested in my response to Spartan Theology's rebuttal, then please stay tuned. So I appreciate Spartan Theology's response to my opening statement, but I feel like I didn't communicate why my 3 points, being prior probability, insufficient explanations, and the poor arguments for God's existence, are evidence against theism. So let me start off by laying out that this entire debate is about arguments for and against theism. It's not about proving theism to be 100% correct or 100% wrong. I did use Christianity as a primary example in some of my arguments, but for the most part, I feel like I generalized everything to just be on theism. So Spartan Theology doesn't understand how my first 2 points matter in this debate. First, the prior probability of something is how we gauge our expectations of reality. For instance, based on our prior knowledge, we would expect our cars to start in the morning. Now, does that mean that the car will definitely start? No. The purpose of a prior probability is not to definitely prove that something will not happen or can't happen. But it does show that we need a lot of good, strong evidence to overcome a low prior probability. Like with the car analogy. The car literally not starting in the morning is very strong evidence against our prior knowledge. When we look at theism's claim of a God existing, our prior knowledge indicates that all of our man-made definitions of God have been proven to be wrong. We would need similarly strong evidence to suggest that theism in general is true. So theism right off the bat has a lot to overcome. You also played at a tu quoque fallacy by suggesting that just because there are a lot of religions out there, that means that one must be true. But in reality, that's not the case. All I said was that the prior probability is so low that it makes the plausibility of a God existing very low. But there is an equal probability that either one of these religions is correct or none of them are correct. That is the issue here. Just because you have a lot of ideas about something doesn't mean that one of those ideas has got to be correct. But all those ideas can be wrong. Next, insufficient explanations should be very important to you because theism is supposed to describe an aspect of reality. If it cannot give sufficient explanations for things that happen in reality, then what good is it? Even in your statements, you show exactly what I'm talking about. You acknowledge that on your worldview, God is the ultimate reason why the sun goes down. And in your original opening statement, you suggest that God is needed for all of nature to even function. So if all of the explanations that theism can give us just resolve to God, then what use is it? Does God actually explain anything in reality? No, of course it doesn't. It's an ad hoc explanation that doesn't explain anything. Again, I ask, if theism is supposed to describe some aspect of reality but doesn't actually describe any aspect of reality, then what good is it? Now, again, I want to reiterate that neither of these arguments are supposed to prove that God cannot exist or 100% doesn't exist. I'm an agnostic atheist, so I don't know whether or not a God exists. But I don't believe a God to exist because theism simply hasn't met the burden of proof. Christianity is only one example of a theistic religion that I don't consider to be true whatsoever. I highlighted a few things that Christianity definitely gets wrong, and it's disingenuous to frame it as, well, Christianity gets these few things wrong, so therefore that means the entire thing is wrong. Every single aspect of Christianity does not match reality. You somewhat defend the resurrection as something that definitely is true in Christianity, but I doubt that you could substantiate that with good evidence. I've heard all of the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, and really it just all comes down to fallacious reasoning in order to make your point. Finally, you complained about my issues with the arguments for God. Like, for instance, I didn't go through every single version of the cosmological argument. Obviously, I was trying to be very general about theism, and I only had a certain amount of time to make my case, so I wasn't going to go through every single variation of the cosmological argument. I don't think that your particular contingency argument is any better than the Kalam cosmological, though. You also made it sound like I just state that these arguments make leaps in logic without giving you a understanding of why I consider them to do that. I specifically stated that you have to prove that God is necessary for nature to even function. Now, you attempted to do that in your opening statement, but it seems like you just consider ad hoc asserting that God is necessary for nature to function is a good enough explanation for why nature functions. This simply is not a good explanation, and it doesn't meet the burden of proof on your end. You also complained about the moral argument pretty much just being an argument against Christianity, or specifically the Old Testament. This entire section here, the arguments for God's existence, is just a general list of the common arguments for God's existence, which morality is one of those arguments. Now, I use Christianity as a primary example just because I'm familiar with it, but I believe that the argument stands on its own regardless of whether or not you base your morality in Christianity. Christianity is just a really good example of how our interpretation of a religion changes over time, and that inherently changes the morality that is supposed to be immutable in that particular religion. That was the entire point of that argument. So no, I wasn't arguing against the Old Testament or Christianity or anything like that. I was just using it as an example. Now, I don't know if any of this has given you better insight into why my 3 sections there really apply to this debate. Just to kind of summarize, I guess, the prior probability manages our expectations of what we should expect to see in reality. If something has a very low prior probability of happening, we would need good evidence and strong evidence to suggest that our prior knowledge of something is wrong. The insufficient explanation should be important to you, because what is the point in having theism if it's not going to provide any kind of explanations for anything? If it all just resolves to one particular answer, that being God in some fashion, then it's not really giving us any kind of answers. That's a blow to theism because it's supposed to describe aspects of reality, but it really doesn't. And then finally, the arguments for God's existence. All of them were very general, even though I use Christianity specifically in order to illustrate what I mean by the arguments being insufficient. So that's going to be all for the debate this time. We do have a Q&A section that we're going to piece together, I believe. So if you want to leave some comments down below, I'd really love to hear your thoughts and questions. There's already been some questions that I'm going to be highlighting, so I would really appreciate some more. I do think it would be interesting to see if Spartan Theology would be up for a similar style debate on the resurrection. I think that we could have a really good conversation about it. Let me know in the comments below if you would like to see that debate happen. Spartan Theology has put up his rebuttal to my rebuttal over on his channel. So go and check that out, and I guess I'll see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.